Hello and welcome to the Catholic Art Institute podcast. I'm your host, Kathleen Carr. I'm the president and founder of the Catholic Art Institute. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Cody Swanson, who is a sculptor and artist living in Florence. We are starting a new initiative this month featuring artists that are accomplished in their field of sacred art. And we're calling it the Artist of the Month. So Cody is going to be our first artist. And I'd like to begin by introducing him and providing a bit of background. So Cody is an American sculptor who lives in Florence with his wife and 5 children. He holds an MA in liturgy, sacred art, and architecture from the European University in Rome and studied sculpture in their 3-year certificate program of the Florence Academy of Art, where he continued to teach for 5 years. Cody is the co-founder and former board member of the Sacred Art School of Florence and spearheaded their traditional sculpture program for 9 years. At his recently established private studio in northern Florence, he continues to produce award-winning sculpture for churches and private collections throughout Europe and the United States. Noteworthy examples can be found at the Duomo of Florence, St. Dominic's Priory of London, the Benedictine Monastery of Norcia, St. Joseph Cathedral of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, St. Patrick's Church of New Orleans, Louisiana, the National Shrine of Mary at Holy Hill in Wisconsin, the Campus Biomedico of Rome, the Jesuit School of Tampa, Florida, and the Église Notre Dame des Écoles in Marseille. Tremendous love for classical art and architecture with pursuit of continuity have formed Swanson's methods. With prestigious commissions, gallery representation, and academic positions, they have demonstrated an ability to aptly organize budgets, timetables, and curricula. This is so impressive. So thank you so much for joining me today, Cody.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I know how busy you are, so I think it would be great if we could just get right to it. So after that impressive lead-in, I was wondering if you would be willing to share a little bit more about your background and training and how you came to discover the Florence Academy and study in Rome, etc.
Well, when I was in high school, when I was a junior, I became very interested in classical art and particularly the 16th century artists such as Da Vinci and Michelangelo. And so I started to attend life classes at the local art center, the Huino Yao Art Center in Maui, and I wanted to pursue a vocation as a figurative artist. So I then found the Florence Academy online, which is structured really after the École des Beaux-Arts of the 19th century, and it's a wonderful school, a wonderful program rooted in tradition and founded upon the observation of the figure. And I really admire Daniel Graves and Rob Bodum and all the teachers I studied with there. After I finished the 3-year program, they asked me to stay on, so I was there for another 5 years, and then I went on to help found the Sacred Art School.
Yeah, that's obviously providential that you were able to find that teaching, because oftentimes I don't know that people are aware of it, or they think they're going to go to just a regular, very well recognized art college. But oftentimes, like, those skills are so foundational. So it's great that you managed to find that, and then went on to study liturgy, sacred art, and architecture in Rome. That's also, wow, Yeah,
that was a great school. It wasn't so practical. It wasn't practical training, but that helped me. At that point, I'd already converted. I'd become a Catholic, and I was very interested in learning more about the church and the faith, and that really helped out a lot.
So maybe you could tell us a little about that. Your conversion story. So clearly it must have been, studying the art of the church and then being, immersed there in Italy. I'm sure that must have played a big role.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I was raised a Christian. I was raised in Pentecostal churches, and I'm very grateful to my parents for a Christian upbringing. But I was always very inspired by sacred art, so that would, of course, lead someone to spend a lot of time in Catholic churches. When I was a student, there was a friend of mine, a friend of my future wife's, and myself, who converted, and I was very blessed to meet my wife then, and she also had a desire to get to know Christ, and through this conversion of our friend, that really got the gears turning, and we decided to study the catechism together, and we were baptized and married.
Wow. I know so many people that have come through to the church through the art and the beauty. In this organization, there's many converts that have volunteered or work with me, and it's I sometimes wonder if the modern church realizes the real power there. So that's amazing. I'm thanks for sharing that. I was wondering if you could expound a bit on some of your work. You have many beautiful examples, and it's so impressive. What an honor that you were tasked with some of these sculpture projects, the Duomo and around the world. Maybe we could just begin with the latest one that you're working on for the Benedictine monastery in Norcia. Mm-hmm. I see that you've been commissioned to do a Madonna Child with the goldfinch, which is a repeating theme that you see in Catholic art. So could you talk a little about that? Like, how did that commission come about, and why that particular theme?
Sure. Well, Father Benedict of the monastery in Norcia wanted a Madonna Child for the monastery, which is undergoing a huge renovation. Initially, they wanted that the Madonna Child be placed inside the monastery with an inscription "Sub tuum praesidium," which is a prayer they say every time they're going to leave the monastery or go on a trip. But they decided to dedicate the church to Sancta Maria Misericordiae. So they changed the inscription underneath, and they placed the Madonna at the entrance, outside the entrance of the church. I actually suggested the cardellino or the goldfinch because it was a traditional symbol, which is shown with the Madonna Child to foreshadow the passion and death of Christ, because the goldfinch likes thorny thistles. I also thought, in the chance that there may be European goldfinch present in Norcia, it would be fun to break the fourth wall, so to speak, and have Our Lady and Lord right there with us, in a cardellino.
That's so amazing. I love hearing how that you've brought your knowledge of art history to this commission to make a suggestion like that, and it's such a beautiful, charming thing that you've done with that sculpture. Really, it's fascinating. I'm wondering if we could move on and talk a little bit about your commission for the Ave Regina Pacis statue that you created for Mary Queen of Peace Parish in Louisiana. I see that you based it off of the one that's in St. Mary Major, Rome. But in all of your work, you have this beautiful way of making it original, yet working within the tradition. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about that particular sculpture.
Well, you mentioned it was based upon the statue of Ave Regina Pacis in Rome. They had actually initially asked me to make a copy of that statue, a replica. And I suggested that we do something original. I much prefer to do something original. So I composed and arranged the figure, arranged the drapery in an original composition, still under the theme of Ave Regina Pacis. I had sought to really idealize Our Lady. That for me was very important in that composition, as it is in general when I go about producing a work such as that. And one of the reasons is that Bernini is quoted in the diary of Paul Friart de Chanteloup as stating that because of original sin, nature has many faults which should be corrected by the artist.
That's a really astute and interesting observation, which I think is really important and sometimes lost in more modern sacred art. I love that interpretation, and it's really beautiful that you were able to use your son and your wife as models, but exactly right, at doing the idealization that needs to be there, as you said, which is working within that tradition, but you have made something completely original. It's really a beautiful and breathtaking piece. I was also
my wife.
Sorry, your wife. Go on.
Well, my wife and my children work. They are models for these types of pieces when I do them, and obviously I very much love my wife and love my children, but it does seem inappropriate that I would try to make something look exactly like one individual. So going back to what Bernini said, theologically, it would seem like a no-brainer that since the Virgin Mary was preserved from original sin to bear our Lord, that it would be wrong, it would be vulgar if she looked like any one individual rather than being idealized.
Yeah, that's so well put and exactly right. And I think that's why, Dr. McNamara talks about this, that, divine idealization, and that when something is too specific, we lose that sense that we're looking at someone that is, partaking in divine life. That's a holiness that should be there, that Our Lady is radiating, and it becomes a little too pedestrianized and specific. So you've done really well to do that. You've used the models, which is a wonderful thing, but you've idealized them in the way that the work is really appropriate in communicating, what it should do for modern sacred art. So it's fascinating, and I love to see that. I love to see that you've done so well to work within the tradition, but make original work. And I see with a lot of your work, you're using the symbolism with it. So one example, which is a really interesting one, is the statue of Saint Michael that you did for St. Patrick's Church in Louisiana. Of course, Saint Michael is slaying the devil, but then you have the medallion, holding the medallion of the face of Christ. Could you just tell us a little bit more about the approach that you took there for that statue?
Sure. The iconography is very unique. Father Stanley Cloris, who commissioned the sculpture, he specified that he wanted St. Michael to be wearing a loros rather than the kind of more stereotypical armor, which is how he was depicted in the 6th century mosaics of Ravenna and also subsequently in the East. That type of vestment was used by Byzantine emperors and is symbolic of the divine authority of Christ. For the paten that he's holding, in one hand he has a trisagium with the Sanctus written in Greek. In the outstretched arm he has a liturgical paten, which is reflecting an image of our Lord, the Holy Face of Christ, which Father Cloris also asked that I take from the image, the Volto Santo of Manopello, which is believed to be a miraculous image on the second burial cloth. There were two in the scriptures, which was placed directly upon the face of our Lord. And of course, also in Byzantine iconography, St. Michael's often next to the Pantocrator. So the idea is that he's standing before the heavenly throne, and the paten is reflecting the image of our Lord. So it's pretty wild iconography.
Yeah, I'll say it's not something that you see every day, but again, it's rich with symbolism and a really interesting and unique take on that. I love hearing about how you've interpreted the subject matter while also working with your patron, because sometimes it's not always readily available information for people that are starting out in the sacred arts, how these commissions come about and how you would work with a patron. So that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I was also interested in how you did a similar thing with your interpretation of St. Luke. Oftentimes, when we go into the churches, we'll see statues, and I don't know if it's always taught in art history, probably not, where you'll know that it's a martyr because they have their palm leaves or the various other symbols. And so for St. Luke, you did a similar thing, including the winged bull, and carrying, he's painting on a panel. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about your beautiful interpretation of St. Luke.
Sure. No, thank you. Well, St. Luke is I'm doing 4 evangelists for the Jesuit high school, and animals are the tetramorph. That's the classical symbol. They're usually readily identified with those. Luke is the ox, John the eagle, Mark the lion, and Matthew the angel. Luke was not an apostle, but he was thought to have been an artist and a physician, and in fact the first artist to paint the Holy Family. So there are many images throughout Europe attributed to Luke, including one which is very close to Florence here in Impruneta. So I thought it'd be fun to depict him in the act of painting, and contrary to heavy static nature of sculpture, the angels are giving an illusion of the image floating, along with the dynamic twist, rather than having the figure standing straight forward and the niche facing us, he's in the act of painting perpendicular to the viewer. So it was a really fun composition.
Yeah, it is. It's beautiful and enchanting, and you've included all of that symbology, but you've done it in a really unique and imaginative way. And I think you do that with all of your work, which is really it's great to see it. It's so fascinating, because you can see that you've been influenced from history, but then you're making it your own. You're making it original, and communicating everything that needs to be there. So on that note, maybe you would be willing to share some of the influences that you've had on your work. I can definitely see Bernini as one of them. Who else would you say has been a big influence on your work?
Well, I love Bernini. I'll admit I love Bernini, but it's important to look at the ancients, Praxityle, Lysipo, Polycletus. We're so blessed to have these wonderful examples. And, I really love Raphael, Poussin, Carracci, Reni, Baciccio. I don't want to name too many, but Duquesnoy, Bouchardon. Not only for the originality of their own work, but because you can really see the profound influence of the ancients. And, through their study of those ancients and their devotion, they develop something very, very unique and personal in their own way. And Bernini I admit is my favorite. I absolutely love Bernini. He was a family man. He had 11 kids. Many of them entered religious life. And, I think that the art really reached a great summit in the 17th century. That was a very special period. And I think a lot of it was because of the devotion that these artists had to Christ, and also because of their study of the past. But the vitality of the Counter-Reformation is just as inspiring and relevant in our own time as it was then. And I just feel really drawn to that period of time.
Yeah, I agree. And I do too. I mean, it's hard not to be completely swept away by Bernini. And you're right. I think, in the modern church, and especially in the modern art world, it is important to look back to that time period, which was countering a lot of iconoclasm. And unfortunately, we're still stuck with some of that today. So I think it's always going to be informing us even to this day. It's really good to hear that perspective. And you don't hear in art history that so many of these artists really were deeply faithful. They really were. They understood their faith, and I think it's imbued in their work. It's why it's so touching and moving, in addition to being so, skillful and breathtaking. And I think it's something that, as I go on with this organization, I'd love to shine a spotlight on that and talk more about some of these artists from history and their faith and how it informed their work.
They weren't held at gunpoint by the church to make sacred art.
That's right. That's right. And there's this perception that, it's the big, bad, evil Catholic Church, with all this money and greed. No, there's this understanding that these are, our gifts as artists are for the church and for, the reverence of other people, bringing them to prayer, and that we want to give the best to God. And so these patrons, wanted to do that, to give the best to the church. It wasn't just this top-down thing that is oftentimes, you'll hear in art history class that's very skewed.
No.
Okay, so that said, I wonder if you would be able to share some advice for aspiring artists, and a little bit about your teaching in the Florence Academy and Sacred Art School. Like, what would you say to young artists trying to, devote themselves to sacred art or the arts?
Well, I think that art should be looked at as a vocation. I taught for several years with the Sacred Art School and with the Florence Academy. I'm now working on my own in my studio, and I'm still accepting. A lot of my former students are working with me as paid assistants, so I'm still happy to continue working with students and working on their formation. There's still a lot that I'm trying to figure out on my own. Still a lot that I need to learn on my own. But to aspiring students, I'd say, if anybody says that you can't pursue classical art and seek continuity with the past, don't listen to them. Just don't listen to them. And it can be a hard fight to push back against the modernists, but there are a lot of good ateliers and academies throughout the world. I'd be willing to bet in every one of the 50 states you could find at least one very decent atelier. A lot of people leave these good schools like the Florence Academy, they go and they set up ateliers. So there are a lot of good places where you can find very solid formation, and they're promoting traditional beauty. I would say that the study of the figure from observation is absolutely important. That's absolutely essential. But the study of the masters is equally important. And artists should be well informed and prepared to interpret nature. And the more familiar an artist is with the masters, the more they will, learn about themselves and the kind of art that they would like to produce.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and well said. I think there's only some things that you can learn by doing them, but it's important to have a good foundation, master, have a master artist that you have been able to work with, because there's things you need to work through as a young student. The little difficulty seeing halftones and working on your drawing, which is foundational for everything. But it's great to hear that, you're still growing and learning yourself. I think that's an important thing to state, that it's a lifelong pursuit, and we're always going to continue to grow. Of course, you reach a certain level of facility to do things, but there's always room to just continue to refine and grow. So that's thanks for sharing that. Well, I know that you have an awful lot of work and commissions, so I can't thank you again for your time today, and all the way from Florence. It's really been a great conversation. I hope that everyone enjoys this as much as I have. So I hope this is just the beginning of a conversation that perhaps you'll come back on, and we could maybe do some more things in the future with the Catholic Art Institute. I'd be delighted.
Absolutely, thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, well, thanks again, and congratulations for being this month's Artist of the Month, Cody, and we will definitely be in touch and have you back again in the future. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, signing off. Bye-bye.